Hello. Is this mic on? Is this the internet? Good day. How are you? I'm all alone this week. We're talking about whatever you want to talk about. Of course, I've got topics that I can always cover, but I'm here for the people. For the people, man. I just recently, this week, in fact, like every week, shipped a newsletter, almost every week. A newsletter. And I have something to celebrate. So why don't we celebrate it together? In case you're not, by the way, on the newsletter, it's over at Bret.news and 300,000 students. That was a big milestone. We love round numbers. And so very recently, Udemy said, you've hit the round number. And it's exciting. In one course. This is actually just in one course. So we've had over 300,000 total students, but this was a cool one to hit 300,000 in Docker Mastery, my first Docker-related course in 2017. And it's still going. In fact, I just put new videos in the last 7 days and working on yet another set of new videos. So I'm excited. Well, hello, Max. Martin's here. As usual, we got the gang. So I may have said this already, but you should check out some of my stuff. Since we don't have any topics yet, I will go down the list of things. Hello. Venkatesh, is that close? Am I even close? I'm going to try. Welcome. Glad you're here. All right. So a couple of things. So this has a podcast. Now, this particular episode doesn't yet turn into a podcast, although I'm still thinking about it. The podcast is the interviews we have every other week with a special guest, usually with my co-host, Nirmal. And you can just see a bunch of the episodes recently. We had Brendan Burns on of Kubernetes origin fame. We had Edith on from Solo talking about the new hotness, the Istio ambient mesh, which is a easier, smaller way to deploy Istio service mesh. And we talked about Kasten K10 backups. And so every other week we release a podcast episode that's edited down from this live show. And that's why there's somewhere around twice as many of these live show numbers. Someone, I think Max said 232. We're on 232. That's 232 weeks of me live streaming since 2018. And the good ones turn into podcasts. So what I'm toying with the idea of is taking some of the stuff in the newsletter, maybe some of the great questions and answers from this show, and turning those into additional smaller episodes. What do you think about that idea? Give me an idea in chat. I actually put out a notification that you will see if you're on the newsletter. You'll see one later today. I'm also thinking of sending out little quick semi-weekly announcements of, hey, this is going to be on the live show, or hey, we're having this special meetup, or special event kind of things that are time specific. And maybe that's a different newsletter that you can optionally sign up for, like an events newsletter, so you can not miss a thing like this live stream, when I have guests, what guests are going to be on. A lot of that stuff's in the newsletter, but the newsletter is getting kind of long nowadays. There's lots of stuff going on in there. So tell me your thoughts in chat and we can discuss. Another thing that's happening today is there is a hurricane off the coast of Virginia. I live in Virginia, United States, and I am very close to the water. I could walk there in a few minutes, and there's a hurricane out there. So if I suddenly go dark, do not worry, I did not pass out, or I didn't have too much caffeine and fall backwards off my chair. It's probably the hurricane that is knocking out the power, which it's already done once this morning. Wind, wind and rain. Nothing severe, nothing really bad. It's just wind and rain. But that tends to knock out power here. So if you lose me, that's the wrap. That's it for the show. I probably won't come back for that. On YouTube, you can't, the way I set it up is on YouTube, if my stream gets disconnected for more than, I don't know what, it's seconds, it basically decides to end the stream rather than putting a placeholder there, like a please hold. That doesn't happen. If I used Restream or one of the other tools, I could do that, but they cost a bunch of money, and then I have more lag, and you and I can't have a conversation. Have I come to India? Am I coming? I have no plans for India, or even I have not even been to that part of the world. I'd like to go to Japan someday. Not sure if I'll make it to India. It's just so far. And of course, I have to bring my family because my wife and I travel together. So let me know where I should go. But I have there's a lot of Indonesia I'd like to see. There's a lot of places, and I just don't know if I'm ever going to get there. Conferences don't often pay for, well, let's just be clear. Conferences never offered to pay for me to go to India. So that is a requirement. Which is also one of the reasons why this year, I think I put on Twitter that I wasn't making it to KubeCon EU, because to go from America to Europe, wherever that's going to be for the KubeCon, that's a lot of money. And I work for myself. We're a small little team here, and I usually need someone to sponsor me, which usually means I'm speaking, like at DockerCon in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or maybe 5 weeks. Did you know about DockerCon? Today is actually the last day on the DockerCon site to get a $300 coupon. So DockerCon registration goes up tomorrow, the cost. And so for right now, it's $11.99. This is in LA at the beginning of October. It's their first time since the pandemic having a live real world conference. And I have a $300 coupon. I'm just going to go over to Twitter to get it. A $300 coupon off of that price. So it's this one, Docker Lover 300. So in case you're in the States and you're interested in the Docker conference, I think it's going to be focused on developer tooling, building good images, secure supply chain, tightening down the hatches around how you build and test your Docker images, all the best Docker tooling, everything new in Docker Desktop, and maybe a few surprises, of which I don't even know yet. Maybe new features, stuff like that. So, Docker traditionally, unlike a KubeCon, traditionally they announce a few surprises at DockerCon. So I'm assuming that they're going to keep with that trend when they have a real world conference. But they've had already so much new stuff this year in Docker Desktop, in Compose, in the Docker GitHub Actions that I'm a big fan of, that it's hard. I mean, we would be a full hour show for me to talk about all those, which you can go back in this YouTube and watch all of them because I've done it multiple times this year. We've had Docker on the show. We've talked about Docker features on the show. I even have shorts over on the channel. So if you're into the shorts or the reels or the talks or whatever you want to call them, I've started putting out only a few, but I want to do more of these short 60-second explanations of a new feature or a new capability or something interesting that I'm reading about. I'm trying to do this for not just Docker, but also for Kubernetes. So let me know your thoughts on that. Like, what would you like to see in those 60-second breakdowns? Obviously, it's limited to 60 seconds, so it can't teach you everything. But maybe it can summarize a web page. Maybe it can give you the quick and dirty on a new piece of functionality in a tool you use. And of course, I love all the container tooling, so I'm always here talking about those different options. So tell me what you think about those. And I hope to do more. They also, hopefully, when I send them out, I'm also planning on them being Reels. And I need to get back to my TikTok and start putting them on TikTok. Let me know in chat which is your preferred social network for 60-second videos. Are you still on X, Twitter? Are you on Instagram? Are you on TikTok? Are you on something else? Are you on Threads? Are you on Mastodon? Are you spending your days on Blue Sky from Jack? I don't have the capability to send it to all those places because that would take me an hour just to upload. But let me know where you all are at, and I will do what I can to get it on your platform. Right now, I'm sticking with YouTube and Twitter as my main two places. I do post a lot of stuff, or my team especially. Thank you, team. Helping me post on Instagram so that people on there see that stuff. And we stopped doing TikTok and Mastodon for a while. There wasn't after the big hype of Mastodon late last year. Sadly, I haven't seen much activity, and there's only a few people that I follow there that are still actively communicating. So it's like we had all this hype, and then we got distracted by Threads and all the other things. So let me know where you're at. Yeah, and Melvin's on Insta and YouTube. Martin's doing DockerCon virtual. Awesome. I hope I have my essentials in stock. I think I do. Gosh. I don't plan. I mean, the hurricane's not going to like sit on top of us. So I do have backup batteries. I do have, I have batteries. That's pretty much all I need. Hello, Conrad. Welcome back. Some Mastodon fans out there. Yeah, I didn't see a lot of activity, and I certainly wasn't getting activity on my posts. So we stopped posting there on Mastodon just because it didn't seem like anyone was sticking around. Maybe if Twitter gets worse and worse and worse and worse, maybe it'll get more popular again. What are we going to talk about? So just so you know, I have some things. So I mentioned the podcast. So you can get the podcast, previous episodes, throw this in your podcast player, and new shows we'll be throwing in there at least every other week. We're toying with the idea of increasing that frequency, but it makes it doubles our effort. So we're trying to make sure the team can handle the work, that I can handle the work, and make sure that we're delivering you fresh content. Also, I have a course this year, a new course. If you're new to this channel recently, you haven't heard me maybe talk about it, because I've been talking about it all year long. This Maven course, it's a live course. So you can sign up on the wait list. We are announcing the date soon for early December. That will be the next cohort. And this is a combination of video learning on the Maven platform as well as live learning in Zoom. So we will be spending time together doing work and having discussions. A lot of that's driven by the students and their specific needs. So this is meant to get as close to consulting on your real world problems as possible without you having to pay consulting fees. And so it's much more money than a Udemy course, because you get 9 hours in class live with me and the rest of the students where we discuss the issues of GitOps and GitHub automation. We use GitHub Actions and Argo CD as our two main tools, but we will cover lots of other things. And you can find out all the information here, the schedule. It's basically 3 times a week. You're in class for 90 minutes, and then you get a bunch of take-home homework and videos to do. And then you come back 2 days later, and we all work on it together. So you can sign up for the waitlist there. As soon as we announce the dates, you'll be able to enroll. And that's my big jam this year, as well as updating the Udemy courses, because, hey, did you hear? We got 300,000 students in Docker Mastery. I'm going to say that 5 more times today because that's a great goal. I love round numbers. All right, we also have a Discord server. So right above me, DevOps.fan. You can jump into our Discord server. Over 15,000 developers and operators focusing on cloud-native DevOps. So you can check that out over there. We've got lots of channels and topics. There's always stuff happening in there. Every day there's new conversations. It's nice because it's not too much. It's not overwhelming. And there's usually someone hanging out if you have a question. Sometimes you can get your answers pretty quickly. I'm actually very excited to be a part of this community and proud of it. We also have a loot box in case you want some merch, like my tea mug today. Oh, well, you can't see it that way. So love DevOps right on the mug, or a t-shirt, which I'm not wearing, or one of a few other items. So we have 20% off if you buy one or more than one thing, 2+ items. You get 20% off coupon. Make sure you get the coupon. So I love this. One of my favorites, the SneakerNet T-shirt. In case you're got a little gray in you, maybe you're a child of the '80s, and you maybe remember we called it SneakerNet. Also, Converse shoes were a thing. I mean, they're still a thing now, but they're retro because they were originally a thing in the '80s. And we have a 5 1/4 floppy and Ethernet, which was kind of. We were talking about it. We were like, well, when the floppy was out, Ethernet wasn't as popular yet. We were still, a lot of us back in the 5 1/4 days were on non-Ethernet technologies like ThinNet, ThickNet. Ethernet was coming out. We had like Cat 3 back then. So anyway, that's a fun design. Thanks to my friend Ben, who made up a lot of these designs for us, as well as Luke Mai, who made Foxy, one of our favorite designs. Foxy the pirate. Well, the Kubernetes pirate anyway. So anyway, check that stuff out. Conrad, not 100,000 subscribers, but 300,000 students. I'd love to say I had subscribers. I mean, like money subscribers. No, students in Docker Mastery. That's what we're celebrating today. So if you're on my newsletter, the latest newsletter, let me just send it to you all. On the latest newsletter, I sort of tell the story of how we started with the first course in 2016. I was a freelance consultant full-time and took 4 months off, fired all my clients, took the plunge and trying to make the best Docker course on the planet. And then we launched it in early 2017. And of course, that's history. So if you want to read that article, that's the latest blog from this week. By the way, if you didn't know about my newsletter, the free newsletter tries to focus on one topic of the week and tries to give you a little nugget of education every week. Not something huge, not teaching you how to deploy Prometheus or anything fancy. It's usually some new feature in a tool that I'm using or some new problem I've solved or something like that. And so you can go back in the past. You can see that last week I talked about my favorite registrars for buying domain names, the cheapest and the best out there that I like. Spoiler, I think the best one for developers and engineers is, well, I have a list here. You scroll down. Cloudflare. Cloudflare is where I have most of my domains now. It is zero cost markup. So you get it for exactly the actual price it costs from the top level domain companies at the real registrar, not at the whatever they call it, the registrar's upstream ICANN provider. So they don't mark it up. I think they're the only ones that do that. Now, there's a lot of other ones that will give you like the first year or two discount, but unless you keep wanting to move that thing around, you're not going to get as great a deal on subsequent years. So Cloudflare is definitely the cheapest out there. The problem is they don't support most domain names. So Namecheap and Pork Bun might have some of the other names that I'm talking obscure ones like .fun, .fun, or .lol. Those sort of obscure TLDs Cloudflare doesn't have yet. So I personally use Cloudflare and Porkbun now. And Porkbun is new for me. I used to use Hover from 2Cows, but they've gotten more expensive and they haven't added new features. So I liked Porkbun's pricing, plus they're a fun little outfit, and I thought I would try them for a little bit for the obscure domains that I can't fit into Cloudflare. And Cloudflare, I mean, it's complicated. It's like looking at the AWS web console, but it's a great price. So, and you can do lots of things with it. Anyway, so that's last week's episode, and you can go back in time. I talk about Compose's new feature for includes. I talk about GitHub's Copilot chat and how I wrote a whole program in Go in a few hours, and I'm not a Go expert. And then, you just keep going back. I talk about GitHub action permissions and how you might want to set those up and how you want defaults. Basically, it's just an education newsletter, but it really started as a newsletter to let you know everything that was going on, who's going to be on the live show, who was going to be on the podcast, what my favorite tweet of the week was. And then recently this year, I started writing more on specific topics each week. So let me know what you think about that. What other topics you'd like for me to write in the newsletter. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the chat. Hello, hello. Someone's out there is a fan of Foxy. She's a Foxy Fox. How do transfers work at Cloudflare? So you first go in, and Cloudflare is a little weird because the way this all started is that you could host your domains there, but you could transfer them, but you couldn't buy them. Or I can't remember which one started first, but you transfer it just like you do everyone else. You go in there and you actually first need to tell it to be your DNS provider. So the one odd thing about Cloudflare is that they can't be your registrar and not your provider, your DNS provider. They have to be both. So, for example, if I want to put in DNS, if I want my NSs, my name servers, to be AWS, like Route 53, then I can't, to my knowledge, I can't host the registrar for that name on Cloudflare. Cloudflare expects itself to be the DNS. And that's how I kind of started. I started using them for the DNS, and Hover and Namecheap and others were all of my registrars. And I was using the DNS just on Cloudflare because they had the best DNS services. They had all this extra functionality, redirects, 301s, 302s you could do all this stuff with it. TLS built in. So I was using them as a one-stop shop, and then they started offering us to host the domain itself, the registrar for the domain. So you have to transfer it, and once you've done that, you're golden. So the transfer part's the same as any other registrar. It's the fact that they have to also be the DNS hoster. And I'm not sure, but they keep changing the workflow and optimizing it. So the last I did it a few months ago, I thought I still had to move my DNS there first before I could transfer ownership. But that may have changed. It may now be where it does it all at the same time, where you transfer and at the same time it sets up your DNS. It might be a little bit more streamlined now. Yeah. I mean, I loved Hover for years, but I don't think they ever built a CLI. They never got an API. Cloudflare allows you to use configuration files in a Git repo as the source of truth for your DNS. I haven't done that yet, but I've seen other ones do it. It actually, am I stating that correctly? I might be wanting to move to Terraform. Terraform as the methodology for editing my name servers. I don't think Cloudflare itself can look at a Git repo for DNS configuration. But since Terraform has a Cloudflare provider, I've been looking at codifying all of my DNS names, which is a lot. I think I talked in there. I have dozens of domain names and probably close to 100 redirects. And if you didn't know, you can also put all your redirects in Cloudflare for free, if you hit the limit, I think the limit might be like 50. If you hit the limit, I think it's only $20 a month. And you can add all your own 301 and 302 redirects. You can have your own short URL provider, essentially. And that's what I do. So I have close to 100 redirects for everything from like, Bret.live is a redirect. Bret.show is my my own personal short URL provider. Bret.show / DevOps will take you to a web page that talks about DevOps, stuff like that. And I do those links all day long. I don't use Bitly, even though you can put your own domain name in Bitly, because one of the problems with Bitly is you can't change. Let me just back up. For free, that I'm aware of, you can't change where a Bitly link goes after it's created. And that's what I need to be able to do. A lot of my links, I might move the content, or I might change the page of the content that it goes to. And I need to be able to change that after the fact. And there's only a few services out there that you can use to do that. Bitly and a lot of the other short URL providers don't let you do that. You would have to make a whole new URL if you wanted to change where it redirects to. GitOps would be awesome on, and in fact, I think I saw it with a client that was using Terraform heavily, and they were using Cloudflare, and they started doing Cloudflare and AWS DNS through Terraform, hosted in a Git repo. And then, who was it? I might have seen a demo by, let me jump over to their channel so I can find it. Go to my channels. Over to Raw Code Academy. And see if I can find the video. So over on the Raw Code Academy YouTube page, there's some Terraform stuff there. And I specifically remember watching him create Cloudflare DNS stuff with Terraform. There's also another video. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, Techno Tim has a video. So if you're curious about how this might all work, if you were going to use Cloudflare with Terraform specifically for stuff like DNS, let me share this one. Will I still be using Terraform as the main IAC after licensing changes? Yeah, to me, that doesn't change anything for companies using the product as far as I know. If you're just a user of the product, then I don't see how the new licensing changes that. Unless something's changed this week, which I heard that they were changing some of their other licensing, and also their provider, what was it? The provider package system licensing was also changing. But as far as I know, all the clients I have, all the users I know, they just use Terraform internally. They're not selling it to anyone else. They're not providing it for anyone else. So as far as I know, they will still be using Terraform. I mean, there's not really a drop-in replacement for Terraform yet. So yeah, and I mean, we'll see on OpenTF, right? I don't know anyone who's planning to hop to OpenTF yet. Like businesses that I work with or talk to, none of them are shifting over to OpenTF because that's an we don't know how well that's going to go. You know, when HashiCorp adds a new feature, and then OpenTF has to recreate that feature. I don't, in a clean room, I don't exactly know how this is going to really work out. So we'll see. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this happens with Linux, right? This happens with the Linux kernel. I mean, not kernel itself, but the distributions. There's a kerfuffle. We've had this happen with programming frameworks, and usually the initial outcry is worse than the reality, and people that are saying they're going to jump ship don't. Not everyone who says they're going to does jump ship. They're just threatening. And so usually I end up waiting like 6 months to a year to see what the fallout is. And, everyone's still there on the product. I mean, ultimately, HashiCorp still wants everyone to use their stuff. And they know that everyone's not going to suddenly start paying them for free open source products that they've been using for a decade. So I don't see them going after the regular user. Yep. That's a great example. X.org, Wayland, yeah. James, what's up, James? Got another Docker captain in the house. Yep, we're going to be at DockerCon in a month. In case you're just joining the channel, this is the last day to sign up for DockerCon in LA with their early bird pricing. And I sent out a coupon earlier in case you want to sign up. In case you didn't know that DockerCon is back in LA. A bunch of us captains are all going to be there. We're hosting talks. I got 2 talks. I got a hallway track. We're going to do a live stream. There's just going to be a lot going on. I've got multiple obligations every day. So hopefully if you can't make it, you'll be able to watch the live streams, of which I will be one of them. And then I don't know if they're going to live stream my talks, but those at least will be recorded and uploaded later. And that's all happening in 30 days. So if you are interested again in LA, I'm just going to throw in in the chat one more time. If you're interested in going, DockerCon. Yeah, so it's going to be a smaller event than what we thought. When we think of DockerCons, I think of the 5,000-6,000 people in 2018, 2019. It's going to be smaller than that. It's going to be more focused on developer tooling, less focused on production, although it seems like there will still be plenty of production stuff. It just won't be a whole track on, Kubernetes production deployments and stuff like that. It's going to be focused more around the container and building the best containers, the most secure containers, supply chain security for those builds. How do you ensure the integrity with provenance and SBOMs and all this great, wonderful security stuff we've had this last few years? Yeah. And then the best things for your language and your framework, how to build the leanest, meanest containers, the GitHub Actions. Of course, I'll be talking about GitHub Actions because that's what I talk about. I love talking about GitHub Actions. So that's what I'll be doing there. And we're going to have workshops and as well as hallway tracks, which hallway tracks are sort of conversations that are planned ahead. It's almost like having a conversation in a hallway, but we plan it. It usually ends up in a little area with chairs, lounge chairs, and we get to hang out and talk about things like Compose V2. Historically, I have done a Swarm hallway track almost every year since Swarm was created at DockerCon. I don't know if I will do a Swarm one this year. I don't know if anybody is going to be there for Swarm. I'm sure some people will be there that are Swarm people, but I don't know if it'll be worth having a hallway track on. Yeah, Palumi is really loving this. Yeah, I mean, I just learned about a couple of other new projects like Palumi over on the... I'm just going to be bringing up a bunch of YouTube videos today. Let's see if I go last night. So this video over on Fireship on the code report, I'll send this one over. This is, I mean, he does a great job. Very short, fast-paced videos, only 3 minutes long. But I learned about a couple of projects that are possibly wanting to, like the Wing language. Had not heard of that one. For infrastructure. So the problem is now is that we have a dozen ways to build infrastructure and manage infrastructure automation. And the challenge is how, I mean, what I really want is I want something like Terraform. I want it GitOps focused. I want my infrastructure to watch the repo itself and update when I change the repo instead of having to apply or anything. And I don't want to have to write in programming languages because a significant portion of my audience are not full-time programmers. So it's great if you're a full-time programming team and you're running your own infrastructure, but a lot of times your operations are not full-time programmers. So they're maybe not comfortable writing in the developer's language. I also work with a bunch of teams that are polyglots. So they have 3 different languages. And I feel like if you're going to use Pulumi, you kind of got to pick a language. And I mean, okay, we could write TypeScript for infrastructure. It's not particularly exciting to me. And I've not worked with a team that has implemented Pulumi to the fullest extent where it's actually managing everything. And always, if I see it, it's always in a small portion of their infrastructure. And I've not yet seen, we all know what a giant Terraform set of infrastructure tooling repos looks like. And I have not seen what that really looks like from Pulumi's standpoint. So we probably need to have them back on the show to show us maybe some real world examples of a real, a team with 50 different code repos. And they've got infrastructure in multiple locations. And they need to actually configure VMs still because they maybe do some things that aren't completely cloud services. They need to actually SSH in. It's like, what does all this look like? And how do you manage all of it? I just haven't seen it yet. So I don't have a mental model for how we do that versus something like Terraform and Ansible. Martin's asking, is OpenTF getting accepted by the CNCF? I have no idea if it's even applying for that. I don't know. Have you heard news that I didn't know about? I haven't really tried to stay up to date on the OpenTF status. I just know that it was started, so haven't really been paying attention there. So if someone wants to send me some info, you probably can't send links, unfortunately. YouTube doesn't like it when you put links in chat. Most of the things you manage are with Ansible. Is that an option? The only time I see teams using Ansible now that I work with is when they need to actually configure a VM. So Terraform provisions, all the cloud stuff. And then if you have VMs, which every team I know is trying to move away from VM management, right? That's why we have all these other abstractions in the cloud. We have now dozens of ways in AWS to run containers. And many of those do not require you to SSH into a server and to configure a runtime. So for those teams that are still doing that in a VM, maybe they're using Swarm because there's no Swarm cloud, at least a popular cloud that I'm aware of. And maybe they're still spinning up EKS without Fargate, so they have to maybe upgrade the nodes or replace the nodes, and maybe they need to finesse the nodes a little bit. So they maybe do some Ansible for that. But I'd say for every line of Ansible, there's at least 10 lines of Terraform in the teams that I work with. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just, I see much more effort into doing everything they can with Terraform and only using Ansible when they have to. I am also not someone who stays up to date on Ansible news. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about Ansible status and whether it's a replacement for Terraform in some cases. Corey's been playing with Harvester. Do you have any thoughts or experiences with either? Harvester and Rancher. I think that means and. Yes, I mean Rancher I've used since 1.0. And Rancher is fine. It's good. Are you using, when you say Rancher, you're specifically talking about the GUI platform, right? Because Rancher has other tooling, RKE, right? So I know teams that use command line tools just to install Kubernetes clusters, but they don't use the Rancher GUI or the Rancher way of doing things, where Rancher really wants like a centralized Kubernetes cluster that it then provisions other Kubernetes clusters from if you go all in on Rancher. I know a couple companies that do that. I've not used Harvester. Harvester, was Harvester on this show? Okay, so no, I have not used, I'm thinking something different. I have not used Harvester. Sounds... Actually, I might have seen a demo of this in my real world meetup. We have a Kubernetes meetup in my city, and I think I maybe saw this because this is run by Suse. Yeah, so I think I might have seen a demo of this because it works on bare metal, right? So it's actually meant to provisioning more of the stack, I think. So that's a question, actually. I'm not sure. Hello there. Shungo. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Always trying to pronounce names. Crossplane's good, but I always have the problem with Crossplane that you need a Kubernetes cluster in order to start using Crossplane, and Crossplane is just for Kubernetes, and most people I know have way more than just Kubernetes. So maybe I haven't stayed up to date on Crossplane. It's like Nutanix, but open source. I don't know Nutanix either. Is that how you say it? I don't actually know how to say that. I've not worked with anyone that has that product. Based on top of KubeVirt. Yeah, thanks. Hey, Nuno. Another awesome person in chat. Yeah. That's the nice thing about this show is smarter people show up in chat and suddenly we're all learning about something in chat. Together. What's Git port? This thing? I don't know. Everybody's into the dev portals. Oh, look, they're name dropping all my friends. Kunal, Victor. I'll have to learn about that. I don't know about that one. Very interesting. What would be a comparison to, what would be an alternative to Port? Would be other tools that you would compare Port to. And is Port open source? Is it something where I have to use their service, or is it something that I can use? Arturo, how or who created that mascot for your Kubernetes mastery course? That is Foxy, and that is made by Luke Mai, a friend of mine. She makes lots of cute little things for the internet and the real world. Am I also virtual at Google Cloud Next? I am not, Conrad. I've never gone. I've never done a virtual thing. So tell me about it. Is there like online community? I don't even know when it's at. Like, I guess what I was asking is, like KubeCon has the CNCF Slack where we can all attend virtually and hang out in the Slack. Is there something like that for Google Cloud Next? Naveed, hopefully I pronounced that close to correct. Is my course outdated on Udemy? There is always a lecture somewhere that's outdated, always. But I continually update it. So, for example, I fixed an entire section just in the last week. And I fixed another section, though, 2 weeks before that. And I'm wanting or getting ready to record the next new section of additional new content. I added a new set of sections, a whole 18 new videos earlier this year. So you will probably find some statements in there that are not current. But when you have 170 videos, it's really hard to keep every single one of them up to date. So what my goal is with the courses is that they function. If there's a breaking change or something that doesn't work, I tend to add in an explanation really quick to help people understand how that's changed and to get around the deprecating change or the differencing. And then eventually I re-record the videos once they get bad enough that they don't make any sense. I sometimes will put boxes in the videos, so you'll see videos that have been updated with little boxes, maybe because, for example, the command line option changed. I recently just did that for dry runs on kube control commands have changed in the last few years. And 118, versus 127 and 128, they've changed it 2 or 3 times the way that these things function. So I added more lectures and more explanations, and I think it was this month, actually, in August. So it's very active, and people that have questions, I respond to them, and I even have a public updates and fixes board that I keep everything in open source and everything public for what I'm working on, what's next, what I recently finished. For example, I finished these recently, and what I'm working on to update in the courses. Because there's always something not perfect. There's always something that's changed slightly. For example, I have a couple of videos that have an old design of Docker Hub in them. It doesn't really change the video a whole lot, but the design of the website has changed enough that the experience of clicking around isn't the same. So those are on the list to be replaced. I'm always trying to keep up. I now have over 500 videos across all the courses, and so that's a lot to keep current in every single statement. I actually grade, is this a confusing thing? Is this a broken thing? Is this something where I can throw in just a little bit of text before that video comes up and say, hey, in the next video, this has changed. So when you see this command, change it to say this command, that kind of thing. So yeah, it just depends on the level of effort involved. And we work hard on that. I want the courses to be up to date. it's just kind of hard to re-record every video every year, so we don't. We try to record the ones that really matter the most. One of the things that's really happened this year is adding more quizzes to Docker Mastery course and adding more assignments. So expect to see more of that, adding more homework for you to do, not just lecture videos. Yeah. And if you're in the courses, one thing you'll notice, for example, so if you're in one of my courses, like my Docker Mastery course, if you don't get the emails, you can go into announcements and you can choose to get the emails. You may have gotten an email, and that's why you're here today. So we post about updates as well as, for example, earlier this year, a couple months ago, we added new stuff or updated stuff in Kubernetes. I added some additional videos on explaining how to dig into resource objects and how to find more information from them, including I think a quiz that we didn't have before. And then if you keep scrolling back, you'll see back, these are all just this year. I let you know if there's relevant live shows specific to this course, like new Docker Hub features that haven't made it into the course. And if you just keep going back, this is all, again, still this year. You can see, this is an announcement about new videos earlier this year. And these were a whole new section in the course on GitHub Actions for building and pushing Docker images. So, yeah. Great question. Like Backstage. Okay, Port is like Backstage. I kind of was thinking it sounded a little bit like Backstage, but it also sounded more like, Backstage being a purely open source solution. I know there's companies now that are like selling Backstage as a service, but do you like Port better than Backstage? I'm just curious. Okay, steroids is better. Thanks, Garan. That's a good tool for me to check out. All right, what other questions do you have on Docker and Kubernetes? On anything containers? Any other container deployment options you've considered? Are any of you looking at things like Google Cloud Run or App Runner on AWS or Azure's? Let's see, what's it called? Container apps, I believe, is what Azure calls it. These are the more modern abstractions for simpler setups where you don't specifically need to justify Kubernetes, and you want an easier abstraction. And so a lot of the complaints around Kubernetes is that it becomes this whole thing where you have all this other tooling that you have to deploy on top of it, and it makes it rather complicated. So you end up becoming a Kubernetes admin, and you don't have to be. So one of the things that we've seen happen the last several years is, we all love Docker. We wanted more Docker. That's how things like Kubernetes and Swarm and Nomad were created. Lots of experimentation for many years on the orchestrators. And then we had a clear winner in Kubernetes. And it wasn't because necessarily Kubernetes can do everything, which it can do a lot. The reason I say winner is because the entire marketplace started making all their tools work on top of Kubernetes. So a lot of the Swarm fans, by the way, we're having a Swarm hangout tomorrow. Did you know about that? Over in our Discord chat, if you're still wanting to learn about Swarm, if you're curious about other people using Swarm, you can jump into our Discord server. And if you go up to the top, you can go to events. And if you click on events, you can see, basically it's our calendar of events in the community. And tomorrow is our Swarm fans meetup. It's only the second one we've done. And it's just people still using Swarm. They might be using Kubernetes as well, but they might still be using Swarm. They might have good reasons to use Swarm, or maybe they're curious about what's changed in Swarm recently and the new features it got this year. So if you're curious about that, just jump in it's free. You just jump into our Discord server. That's the link right above me. You can come and join that group. So we're going to do that tomorrow. You can add it to your calendar from there so that you can make sure you don't miss it. But one of the other things that's happened, is that Kubernetes basically becomes this great abstraction layer where all the other tooling you may want to run, your Argo GitOps, your Prometheus monitoring, your Loki logging, all these other great tools that run on top of it don't run consistently on all the other things, right? They don't run on Swarm necessarily. So yes, you can make some of that stuff work on Swarm, but it is designed, a lot of times, all these tools are designed to work with Kubernetes. But if you don't need all of that and you'd rather use a cloud's tools specifically, I like the fact that there's so many other ways now we can run containers, and you still are making your containers, still building them the same way, you're still pushing them to a registry the same way. They might just deploy to Lambda or to App Runner or to something else besides a EKS VM that you have to manage. You might be using Fargate, the EKS version or the ECS version. So we've got a lot of these other abstractions, and I'm always curious to hear stories from people about how they're mixing these different container technologies. Some people maybe go down the road of everything's got to be in Kubernetes standard. We always are going to be making a pod spec. Every kind of workload we run, even if it's serverless, is going to run on top of Kubernetes on some sort of other abstraction if required, like a serverless one. Other people say, I'm going to develop specifically for my cloud of choice. So you're going to be picking those specific container technologies on that cloud. And one of the things I wish I had more time, because I'd love to have a show in audio, if we can do it, not a video show, because that is already kind of being done on other channels on YouTube, but an audio channel where we talk about your infrastructure design and stepping us through the steps you take between code commit and production. So I've seen shows where they describe their infrastructure design, and that's very interesting because you can draw all these lines between, RDS and SMS and all these other different tools and SNS and EKS and, and Lambda, and you can draw all these connections, right? And AWS has a great show on that. I think it's like Show Me Your Build or Show Me Your Stack, I think, or something like that. They have a great show on YouTube for that. But what I was imagining was a show where you describe what humans and robots do in the entire process between we committed code in this repo and now it's in production. I'm honestly thinking that it might even be a hard show to do because it's one of those things where, one, some people might have security concerns around being too open about the things they do or don't do in their production workflows, or they might feel, I would feel this way, maybe not, maybe you. I'm not entirely always proud of what that, that we may have tests that take way too long. We may have things that we want to do, like additional security checks that we don't do. So I've always wanted to do that show, but I don't know how I would need to build up a dozen episodes of it before I'd want to release it, because it would be, I feel like it's one of those things where it's going to be hard to find people that want to talk about their stack or their workflow rather of how their code gets into production and what they like about it, what they don't like about it, what they recommend for others and what they're planning on doing, what's their next big change. I think that would be a incredibly insightful show. I don't know how to do it. And I would want it to be on not personal examples. It would need to be on real workloads, like real things that are on the internet and people care that they exist. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a big company. It just means things that people care about, things that exist. Anyway, I'd love to do that show. What do you think about that? How could I make that happen? Who could be on that show? but I'd want to do it in audio only because I wouldn't want to make it so complicated that we have to look at diagrams and we have to, like, if I can't describe it, it's not simple enough. Like I want to go simpler, a little higher level, because I'd love for it to be an audio podcast where people are learning about the workflow designs. Because I teach one, right? I teach this thing that you find over on my website. I teach this GitHub Actions plus GitOps thing, right? This is my latest thing this year. And this is my opinion, right? I'm teaching a specific workflow design where you build, scan, and test your containers in GitHub Actions, and then you use Argo CD to deploy it to Kubernetes in production. And I don't teach how to deploy it to Lambda. I don't teach how to deploy it to Google Cloud Run. I just teach Kubernetes with Argo. So it's a very specific style, very, very prescriptive, and it's opinionated. And I think that helps people because we've got all these tools and all these ways to do things, but no one really gets into the weeds of how all this stuff works together and how do you go end to end from code commit all the way through to production deployment. And to me, that's where I find the most fascinating stuff, because it's like a recipe. It's like we're all chefs and we all make the pie slightly different. And you could fill a whole conference probably with talks of people showing their workflow. And you could pick some of those, or maybe aren't good, you don't like them, or they're not for you, but you would probably learn something in every one of them. Oh, Google Cloud Next is in this week in San Francisco. All right. I guess you're there, Conrad. I'm guessing you're there. Yeah, tell me if you find out at Google Cloud Next if Google Cloud is still going to be a thing in 5 years. Because I think, was it last year in one of their quarterly earnings calls, Google admitted they weren't making any or much money on Google Cloud and that they weren't sure they were going to keep it. That was in a quarterly, like they basically were saying, we need to figure out something, or this isn't a thing we should keep doing, is kind of what they were insinuating. And I think that was like a year ago, maybe half a year ago. I can't remember exactly. It kind of shocked me because it was Google or Alphabet kind of saying, hey, we've tried this cloud thing, but it's not really going gangbusters on the profit side. So I could have misread it, but I thought that's what I was reading in the quarterly earnings. So that got me really concerned, actually, that, Microsoft and Azure are, they're not, they are not leaving that game, and AWS is not leaving that game. But can you imagine? I mean, Google is like one of the biggest companies in the world that constantly closes down the products that everybody uses, and they just get rid of them because they don't make money. And can you imagine the uproar if they got rid of Google Cloud? Oh my goodness. K2D from Portainer and Windows Server containers get portability is now. Windows Server containers getting portability. Oh, so Nuno's talking about, does that mean that Windows containers can run regardless, like the base image doesn't have to match the host or whatever? Not sure what you mean by Windows Server containers being portable. Yeah, K2D from Portainer is a thing. Have they announced it? Yeah, I guess they announced it last month, right? So K2D is pretty interesting. It's an interesting idea. I'm interested to see if it... I don't know anyone that uses it yet, so it'll be interesting to see if people use this. So the idea here is that Kubernetes, the API has become a common abstraction that all the tools are built around and we're all getting used to. But you don't always need Kubernetes. So this is what would we call this? A Kubernetes API emulator for the Docker engine. Kubernetes to Docker is what it stands for. A Kubernetes to Docker API translator. And that means that this is to me, this means it's going to be single machine. So it's meant for IoT on the edge, in your car, in your fridge, on a tractor. Yeah, so K2D. If you're interested in that kind of thing, just search on K2D. K2D.io. Conrad, cool. You got 300 credits. Nice. Yeah, Google Cloud Run. Yeah. Get a CNI plugin into Swarm, and I truly guess it would be great again. I know. I mean, we don't have CNI yet, but we do have the CSI, and I'm anxious to get some storage providers in there that are common use, that more. A lot of people that could use it, because a lot of people want to use Swarm with storage. And I always say just use Swarm for don't run your databases on Swarm. Run those in the cloud, and then run all of your non-persistent. You don't want volumes in Swarm essentially. But now that we have CSI, we're kind of waiting on storage vendors to see if they are going to make things, and they are making things. It is happening. It's just it's slow. And so if you go over to GitHub, so I have a repo called Awesome Swarm, and so the community is helping me maintain this. And thank you, Martin. Let's see, down here under storage, there's some stuff going on here, and I think, is this the one? Yeah, so there's another repo that's off of this, basically, that's monitoring the CSI plugins for Swarm and different PRs and different drivers and whether or not they support Swarm. So we don't yet have a CNI, or basically a replacement for libnetwork, but that would be pretty cool as well. I suspect, though, the minute that happens, that particular CNI will probably need, just like the storage drivers, the CNI itself will have to specifically make changes to work in Docker Swarm, because these things are still different in Docker than they are in Kubernetes, even though they adhere to this CSI and CNI standard stuff. Where do I find your more courses except Udemy? Naveed, I sell on Udemy, and then I have another new course on Maven. But that's only place I can find them. You can find all my courses. I'll put my courses link. It's also in the show notes below, but you can see a list of all my courses on that page there. I just put it in the chat. Cigar, I'm using GitLab managed Kubernetes cluster, added Kubernetes to GitLab using certificates, but how can I access cluster in GitLab CI jobs? Please guide. Sorry, I am not a GitLab user. I prefer GitHub. So maybe someone else in chat. What I would recommend is, there are some people using GitLab. Go over here. This is our Discord server. And go look into the, you can go in the Kubernetes channel maybe, or into the automation channel. The Kubernetes channel is probably a better place. And go in there ask your question. See if anybody has used GitLab for that, but I haven't, so I'm not going to be a good help. Sorry. Naveed will be on the show. All right, I got one sign up. Now we need like 20 more. And then I can record a whole bunch of episodes, and then we can ship a podcast series just on, what are we going to call it? Check out my workload. Check out my workflow. Dev workflows. So we got to make up a snazzy name. We need a good name, people. We always got to buy the domain name first. Always got to get a good name. Ooh, Verizon is Google's biggest client. 34 billion. RPA, I would say always learn to develop first. Kubernetes is not for beginners. Once you've learned to code, as a part of that learning process, you will eventually have to deal with Docker. Because Docker is how you're going to package up your software in most cases, in a lot of cases. So I would focus on the development first. And then at some point after that, once you've understood a lot of the concepts and you're building a useful program, then you learn Docker to learn how to package it. And Docker can also help you make your developer environments easier to manage, depending on which programming language you're using. And then eventually you'll care about production deployments if you're running server software. Kubernetes is just for running software on servers, really. Kubernetes isn't going to really help you in most cases learning to develop. Like, yes, there are developers that use it to run all their services on, all their little microservices and stuff, but that's not a requirement for learning how to code. So I would keep it simple and learn how to be a productive developer. If your focus is on development, great. If you're trying to be a DevOps engineer, you don't have to learn how to develop first. But those are different careers, right? A DevOps engineer, which is a horrible title because it can mean lots of things. It's the same as a developer, or a software engineer. There's a lot of different jobs. So I often would have a conversation with someone about specifically what they want to do. And usually they want to learn how to program, to create things, because that seems more interesting than building servers and automating stuff in the cloud. So people become developers first quite often, and then they eventually are more interested in the automation and the infrastructure side of things, and they maybe pivot. That's not always the case. There are some people that start infrastructure first. Certainly if you're in ops, that was my role. I was ops and sysadmin first before I was a developer. So I preferred working on the real infrastructure. That was back in the day, though, when we had physical servers. I had to put servers in racks. I had to reboot them with my finger. So that's a lot different than nowadays. There's all different ways to get into different roles. It just depends on what your goal is. But just to be a developer, you don't have to know Kubernetes. Good question. Why Argo CD? Well, I think that for Kubernetes, one of the things in the industry that we've been searching for with Kubernetes is a common abstraction for how we deploy to Kubernetes. Kubectl apply doesn't really get the complete job done. There's lots of things that can go wrong if you simply have the robots typing in kubectl apply. So you want a more comprehensive system, and you also want something that's more state aware. It's aware of what you asked it to do and what the cluster is actually running, and how do you know that the cluster is in sync with what you have in your YAML, which you probably store in a Git repo. So Argo, and a series of other tools out there, have started this pattern we call GitOps, which is a workflow pattern and a set of 4 core fundamentals around what it means to be GitOps. And that requires you to use YAML or some other, not necessarily programming language, but a data language like YAML or JSON or TOML or a lot of these other templating systems. You put those in a Git repo. You use Git as your source of truth, and then you take one of these GitOps tools. You put that tool in your infrastructure, or connect it to your infrastructure so that it can control your infrastructure, and it creates the bridge between what you're doing in the Git repo and what it does to your infrastructure. This all started with Kubernetes, but now we can do GitOps for more than just Kubernetes, because GitOps isn't Kubernetes specific. But Argo CD is the most popular tool right now for the GitOps style of deployments on Kubernetes clusters. So Argo CD has lots of great features and benefits, and a lot of my clients over the last 5 years, have moved to Argo as their way for deploying to Kubernetes. They no longer type in kubectl apply. In fact, their developers no longer have access to the Kubernetes clusters. Argo CD automates it all. It doesn't. You don't have to write the program to automate it. It is meant to watch either your image repositories or your Git repositories. It can watch both. It can also watch your Helm chart repositories, stuff like that. And it will watch that stuff for changes and then update your Kubernetes clusters from those changes. And so you would call that a pull model rather than the traditional push model. We're all used to going into Jenkins and typing in a batch script somewhere, kubectl apply. And we're getting away from that because that doesn't have enough rigor to it. It doesn't have a lot of status, and it also doesn't have one of the requirements of GitOps, which is to continually reconcile and make sure that the two match each other. So if someone goes into the cluster and mucks with something and they didn't update Git, then this tool in the middle will change the cluster back. And so it only allows a one-way path where you have to change the stuff in Git, and then it gets applied to the cluster. And if you try to go messing with the cluster, it will, if you configure it to do this, it will go and revert that change, essentially. It will change it back to what Git tells it to do. It's got lots of options and lots of settings and lots of features. For example, you can have it set up so that for every pull request, it automatically deploys in a new namespace all your charts or all your YAML for every pull request. Or it can watch all of your repositories in your GitHub organization or your GitLab organization. It can watch all of them for specific files. And if it sees specific files or specific directories, it will go deploy those to a Kubernetes cluster. So you don't have to write all this programming logic or this automation logic for every single repo. You can actually have a centralized solution that watches for those changes. That's Argo. Well, specifically Argo CD. Argo has lots of tools, 4, I think, to be specific. And Argo CD is what we're talking about here. And Workflows is a workflow engine that allows you to automate things on top of Kubernetes. Rollouts is so that you can have more advanced style of deployments like Canary or Blue-Green. Events is a solution that monitors the Kubernetes API and brings things out of Kubernetes clusters as events for you to then use in workflows or whatever. So yeah, they're all open source tools. And I like to talk about Argo CD. DevOps for Ninja. Is that a name? Is that a name for the podcast? Everything Ninja. Yeah, Argo CD works with GitLab as well as GitHub. It works with a lot of different tools. A lot of different Git providers or SCMs. Sorry, I missed this question. Do you think CKA gives enough knowledge for Kubernetes jobs? It really depends. That's a tough question. It's a start. If you're wanting a job managing Kubernetes clusters, if that's what you really want to do, then you would probably be expected to know a cloud or two and to have certifications in that cloud, to know Kubernetes and to have CKA, possibly other certifications from the CNCF, probably a Linux certification or two, because this all runs on Linux. And if you're going to be a cluster operator, which is what a Kubernetes job is a cluster operator, you're an infrastructure person, which means you need to know the infrastructure. So you need to know Linux well, and you're probably going to be running this in a cloud, so you need to know that cloud well. And you're going to be acting as the Kubernetes person. You're acting like your own infrastructure provider. You're essentially building your own cloud in the cloud or in a data center. And so you're going to need to know all the tools that go on top of Kubernetes. Because when someone says, we want you to operate Kubernetes, they don't really just mean the CNA or the CKA, sorry. The CKA and the other certified Kubernetes, blah, 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 right? Those other certifications are all focused around the core set of Kubernetes tools. But you're probably going to, like in an interview, someone would probably say, what distributions of Kubernetes do you know? So you're going to need to try and learn some of the distributions, like, the cloud ones like EKS, AKS, GKS. And you'll probably need to know a little bit about self-hosted ones like Rancher, K3S, Keys, right? There's lots of them out there. Mirantis has got, there's dozens and dozens of distributions. So knowing the differences between a few of them, the advantages is going to be good for you to know. And then you're going to probably need to learn a set of those tools on top. You're going to need to learn about, security tools on top of Kubernetes. How do you handle RBAC? How do you handle promotion? Doing things like Gatekeeper or Kyverno, which we talk about on this show. I've had multiple guests on talking about that kind of stuff. And you're probably going to want to learn some monitoring and logging tools on top of it. You're probably going to need to understand how to manage it. So you're going to need to know some of the other management tools out there besides kube control. So the certification itself gets you the core fundamental, but the job is going to be way more than that. So you're going to want to first learn the Kubernetes. That's why I teach Kubernetes in my courses. You first learn the Kubernetes API, and then you're going to need to become knowledgeable enough in Kubernetes that you become an operator, which is more than what a developer needs. The operator for CKA, that's more knowledge about how you manage the infrastructure. How do you do updates of Kubernetes clusters? How do you swap one Kubernetes cluster out for another one? How do you automate the builds? If you're on AWS, how do you build an EKS cluster automatically? And what different tools could you use to do that? You could use Terraform. You could use EKSCTL. You could use CloudFormation. You can use multiple ways to do it. You should probably at least have tried those and know a little bit about them. And then the other thing that I would recommend is you find the tools you like and get good at those tools. So you don't have to know everything, but pick one cloud, one Kubernetes distribution, and then your own set of tools that you would put on every Kubernetes cluster and know those tools. So for example, if you hired me and my job was to run your Kubernetes team of Kubernetes admins, I would, if you're a company that already uses Azure, right? Or let's pick AWS for a minute. It's more likely to have AWS, right? Because they're the most popular cloud. So if they're already on AWS, then you would want to know EKS. And if you hired me, I would deploy EKS Fargate if you told me I had to do Kubernetes. If you said I didn't have to do Kubernetes and you had a smaller team, I might try to figure out ways of using Lambdas if they're in the serverless with containers. I might try to use App Runner, so that I can avoid Kubernetes if I'm allowed to. But if I'm required to run Kubernetes, I don't want to have to run the servers myself. So I would learn EKS Fargate, which allows me to avoid managing the nodes. And then I would learn tools on top of it, like Argo, right? So if it was me, I'm deploying Argo on every cluster. Now, depending on the Argo design, the Argo itself doesn't literally have to be installed in every single cluster. It has different deployment designs, but it's going to be talking to all my clusters to manage all my workloads. It's also going to be what deploys my infrastructure tools. So I want to use Argo to deploy any logging or monitoring solutions. If I want to do any security scanning tools, or I want, let's see, what else? Would I want something like, Fargo. Not Fargo. Falco. I don't know why I said Fargo. So for example, Falco is a tool that you can use in your Kubernetes clusters. And I think this is one of those tools that's an essential on all clusters. It monitors for threats. It can help you see what's going on in your cluster. And even if something gets through or something bad happens, you can have logging and essentially this awareness of what's really going on in case you need to trace down a potential hack, a potential vulnerability that someone's exploited in your system. Another tool that I would probably deploy if it was my doing and I had complete control would be Kyverno. And Kyverno's been on the show, and Kyverno is a great policy management solution. We all need an enterprise Kubernetes. If you're going to be working a job where you are managing nothing but Kubernetes and that's your main job, you're going to be working in a big company, or it's not going to be a 10-person company probably. So you're going to need some sort of policy to control what gets deployed, to make sure that there's standards for the security setup of your pods and all the workloads that you're going to deploy. And Kyverno can do that. It can do that quite easily, actually. That's why it's my favorite. So it's another tool in my tool bag that goes on every cluster if I get a say. Hopefully that helps. What else we got? All right, Naveed's back. A Java and Angular developer, is it worth it to learn Kubernetes deeply and other tools like Terraform? Is it worth it? I'm not sure that that's the question you should ask. Is it worth it? So every tool you learn, whether it's a new programming language, a new framework in your existing languages, a new method for deployment, a new cloud, a new infrastructure tool, these are all things you could learn. It's only worth it to you if that's what you want to do. If you're someone who just wants to stay a programmer and you don't want to know how to deploy your own infrastructure, and you don't need to know the complicated enterprise ways to deploy all the containers, then I would say you can stop at Docker. Just learn how Docker works, learn how to develop locally with Docker and Docker Compose. And optionally, that's why in my Docker Mastery course, I still teach Kubernetes and Docker Mastery, because I think there is a base set of skills for Kubernetes that you should be aware of, so that when you have these conversations, you at least know what Kubernetes is, you know what some of the things that are possible, and what a pod is. How is a pod different than a container? Once you understand that stuff, as a developer, you don't have to learn all the other things. Not every developer needs to do that. And that is because there's lots of different jobs in development. Software development has a lot of different areas for you to focus on. And I think something on the internet that people get frustrated with is thinking and complaining about having to learn all this infrastructure stuff because we're no ops. We don't have any person like me that does the ops stuff. And that's not always the case. There's lots of teams where that is a different team, or that's a specific role in the team, and that might not be you. There's tons of front-end developers that if I asked them to set up Kubernetes and deploy their front-end apps to Kubernetes, they wouldn't know how to do it. But they're a great front-end developer. They don't need to know all that. They maybe know a simpler way. And if the team they're working with says, we deploy your front-end app, your Angular app, on Kubernetes, well, all you have to know how to do is write a Docker file and get that app into the Docker file built correctly. Because that's a little bit more of the developer's job, right? Describing your requirements. What is the commands you use to build all that front-end CSS and JavaScript and minification and like the tests you need to run? What test suite do you use? That's a developer's job. So you're going to be filling that out in the Docker file. And then you might just hand that Docker file off to someone else in your team, and they might make a pod spec in Kubernetes for it. In case you're curious about the pod spec, once you know the basics of Kubernetes, like you can take in my courses, you can go, I have a pod spec on GitHub. It's simply github.com/Bret Fisher/podspec. So I have what I consider, and I still use in production workflows, my base pod specification that goes in every workload that goes on Kubernetes. This is what I start with. And I might add some things, I might take out some things, but this is my cheat sheet for getting started in a deployment, in a job, in a cron job, in a stateful set, all the different ways you can run a pod in Kubernetes. This is what I start with. And so if you understand the basics of this as a developer, one, you're already ahead of a lot of other people. There's a lot of people that don't even know this, right? So you're already doing great. But do you really need to know how to deploy Kubernetes automatically with Terraform onto Azure or AWS with all the proper logging and monitoring and event management and Slack alerting and GitOps automation? No, you don't have to know all that. If that's not the role you want, you don't need to know it. Now, if your career is focused on Java and Angular, your career will probably serve you better by learning the tools around that, like learning different ways to build Java containers. Learn let's see. I'm going to try to pull up. Someone's going to know this in chat faster than I know it. The custom way, there's a custom container builder for Java. And I always forget, because I'm not a Java person, so I always forget it. And if Eric was here, Eric would know. But Jib, maybe? Is it Jib? Or something else. Anyway, someone will probably tell me in chat. But that's probably more worth your time. You definitely want to be, I think all developers really work great once they know how to make their own container images and they know the details. They want to keep their image small. They know how to scan it with a security scanner like Docker Scout or Snyk, SNYK. You use one of these things to scan your image to make sure that it has little to no vulnerabilities in it. And when you've done that, a lot of times there's going to be someone else in your team or another team that manages Kubernetes for you and manages Terraform for you. If you're trying to be someone who is a developer who also knows the infrastructure, which is not everyone, that's a specific kind of job, and you can become an expert in that. If you're naturally interested in it, sure, go learn it. If you're naturally wanting to know, if you'd like to be able to deploy your own stuff without any help in an enterprise format with Terraform and all the things, then yeah, sure, go learn that. But I definitely don't think that every developer needs to know that. I would say in teams I work with, that have monolithic traditional applications and they're They've got some containers. They've got, they're not a bleeding edge, tip of the spear type of team that's using Go and Rust. Like, there may be a traditional team. They've got some front end stuff. They've got some Ruby. They have some Node.js. They might have some Java. Those teams, I'd say in a team of 6 to 8, there's maybe 1 or 2 people that know how to make a Kubernetes cluster. Everyone else doesn't care. No one else cares. And the 2 people that might make it, they may either be responsible for it or they just know enough to be dangerous, and it's actually another team that builds and manages all the infrastructure for them. So not every company has a DevOps team, but some teams might. Some teams might have an ops team that manages the infrastructure for you. They call it different things. Or sometimes it's just a person or 2 in the teams themselves that have the expertise. So it's really up to you. And I think it's that magic that we all have of, I want to do something that's interesting, but I want to do something that's easy to find a job for and it pays well. So you've got to find like that holy trinity of pays well, lots of jobs, and I'm happy and I'm interested in this work, right? And that's the thing, is there's 1,000 different ways to have a software engineer job, right? Medium, what's up? Oh, RPA asked another question. I missed it. Sorry. Is the DevOps engineer the responsible of the data security after the deployment of developers? It really depends. Again, this is hard to say because every company's makeups are different. Sometimes that is the responsibility of the security team. When you say data security, sometimes people think that means backups, and that's a good use of the term. So sometimes there is a backups team. The infrastructure team manages backups. When you maybe say data security, maybe you're talking about the permissions or the security rules for how to access the database or the passwords. That policy may be designed by a security team, and the DevOps team they're just users of the security policy set by the security team. So it really depends on the team, on what security expectations each job has. It depends on the size of the team, the size of the company. And I've worked with all kinds. I've worked in teams where there is no security expert and it's just someone's part-time job and they make it up as they go along. And I've dealt with very large companies that are very formal, and there are multiple levels of security teams, and the DevOps engineer is just adhering to standards and using the tools set by another team that creates those for them. I've worked with teams where the DevOps team is the security team, so they call themselves the DevSecOps team, and they create standards for, we're going to use Kyverno policy management. We're going to do password rotation. All of our keys are stored in Vault. And, they have all these tools and methods that they set for everyone. And they're the DevOps team, but they're called the DevSecOps team. So it really depends. Think of these as roles, not as jobs. So you might have a DevOps job that the roles include managing the build farm for building all the Docker images, managing the Kubernetes clusters, and managing the Kubernetes security policies, as well as password policies and network policies and all those different security things. That might be one team's job, and it might be 3 people have to do all that work. So it just really depends. There's not, in my experience, any standards for exactly how these roles lay out. I often find teams that will change who does what based on the expertise of the people. So if they hire a new person that's a developer but also a security expert, they might assign them more security stuff to do in addition to being a developer as a part of an existing team. So they might actually change because they get new expertise in. It's a great question. Great questions. Medium. I am contemplating whether to use Argo or Flux for GitOps within our team. What are your thoughts? They are both great tools. And I've seen teams that even use both tools at the same time, because Flux is easier to install, but it doesn't really have a good GUI. It doesn't have any GUI built in. So It doesn't provide you the wonderful dev dashboard that you can see your workloads actively deploying and if they're successful and which versions are in deployment now. And the Argo dashboard is fantastic. So Argo is a little more complicated to deploy because it's got all this stuff in it that it does more. It has way more security, like SSO, single sign-on, that Flux doesn't have. Flux is primarily a command line tool for humans and robots, and Argo is primarily I honestly think of it as less of a command line tool because I don't really use the command line much. It does have a command line, but I use YAML with a few commands plus the GUI. The GUI is fantastic. It is very feature rich. They put a lot of effort into it. Both tools have features that the other tool doesn't have. So, for instance, right now, to my knowledge, Flux can be used to pull Helm charts and maybe even Kubernetes YAML from OCI registries, if I think I'm getting this right, so that you don't even need access to Git repos from the tool. You can just have access to a registry. And we don't yet have that, I think, in Argo CD. Argo CD has this wonderful thing called application sets, which is a very easy way to make one or two YAML files that then consume all the containers and Kubernetes information from all the other repos all at once. It's great. It's very easy to use. And it's what I teach in my Maven course. So I teach Argo CD because I like that model. I think the GUI is fantastic, and I think it's honestly one of its best selling points because that web UI is what I give to developers. And I say, here you go. Now you don't have to go use kube control commands. You don't have to figure out a Kubernetes administrator dashboard like the Kubernetes dashboard or Rancher or some of these other tools that are really meant for, they're designed around cluster administrators, not developers who are deploying applications to Kubernetes. So Argo's dashboard, I think, is very developer-centric. It shows you your app and then everything else inside your app and whether those things are current, whether they're in sync with Git, whether they're up and healthy, and it ignores all the infrastructure. It doesn't care about what you use outside of Argo. It doesn't care how many nodes are in the cluster or what cluster Kubernetes versions there are, or or CSI or CNI. It doesn't care about any of that stuff. It only cares about what it's managing on the clusters. It doesn't even really have a cluster-centric view. It focuses on the app, not the clusters or the nodes or any other stuff. That's for different tools. So Argo is really great at that. Now, there are ways to use Argo and Flux together. So I would say, honestly, if it was me, long story, long answer to your question. If it was me, I would try Argo first, only because that's the one I have the most experience with and the most success with in winning over teams to GitOps. Because make no mistake, your developers have to be sold on the idea of GitOps. Whatever you're doing today, however you're deploying today, if you start telling people they have to make more Git pull requests to get their stuff on servers, you might receive some pushback, some friction, because no, I don't need more pull requests, right? No one wants another pull request just to get the code into the servers. So you can automate all that with GitOps, but you need to get them on board with the idea of trying it. And I think one of the best ways to do it is to give them read-only access to the Argo CD dashboard. You automate everything in Git. The Argo solution is sitting there talking to Git, reading the Git, but your developers get to see this wonderful status dashboard. And they didn't have that before. If they had other tools, they weren't as good. And so they get this new dashboard that just focuses on their apps and everything in their apps, all of the persistent volume claims, all of the services and the URLs, all of the ingresses and the deployments and all the things that are a part of their app, so that when they deploy their app, they go into Git. They maybe don't even have to go into Git. Maybe it's all automated, but you can set up so that there's one PR they have to make, You can also automate that PR so that the only thing they have to do is approve it. So they get a nice PR. It's made by the robots, and it says, this is the image name we're changing to. We're changing from the old image name to the new image name or tag, right? Changing that tag because you built a new version of your app. So you see this PR, it's changing the Kubernetes YAML. Maybe it's Helm, maybe it's customized. It's changing that YAML. They accept it. And then the standard problem is the developer doesn't know what's the status. When is it going to be up on the website? When is my backend code going to be deployed? How long is it going to take? Did it work? None of that stuff is in Git. So that's what the Argo CD dashboard is. So as soon as you hit the pull request approved command and it merges your commit into the YAML, within minutes, Argo is going to pick this up and it's going to deploy it. And they're going to want to look at a dashboard that tells them exactly what's happening. How many of the pods have been replaced so far? If it's a rolling update and you have lots of pods, it might take a while. So they can see all that in the Argo CD dashboard. And that's why I have this course. I feel like I'm leading to another ad. This is why I have this course on Maven. We're going to be announcing dates to teach our third group of students in December. The first two groups loved it and gave me a 9.2 rating out of 10 stars. Thank you. I appreciate that. So this is a live workshop-based learning path on learning the automation of building and testing your apps and then deploying them to Kubernetes in a real-world setting. So you get a mock organization, you create up a new organization in GitHub, you do all these things in GitHub just like you were a real org, making multiple repos, making all this YAML. You make up a bunch of GitHub Actions that I give you. You implement this stuff on a sample application, and then in class, you can take that knowledge in the 2 weeks we give you and go back to your team and try to start using it, and then come back to class and actually get feedback on what you're really trying to do. So that's why I invented this course, was because I wanted people to have real-world applicable solutions with examples, with being able to test it and try it out on samples as well as real code. Oh my goodness. And we do all that in 2 weeks. And it's only a couple hours a day. And we all jump into Zoom every couple of days together. So go check that out if you're interested more in the Argo. Hello. Sharing the roadmap on how to be a DevOps engineer. Also suggest some of my best courses. Well, I only have 5 courses, and they're all linked below. So if you would like course coupons for my discounts, if you don't know anything about containers, you're going to start with my Docker Mastery course. And the link is below in YouTube. And here's the link again to that. All my courses are listed on my webpage. And there's coupons there for the ones on Udemy. And you start with Docker Mastery. That's meant for people starting to learn containers. And to be a DevOps engineer nowadays, it's assumed that you know how to deal with containers. So I don't really have a roadmap, but there's really good ones online. So if you check out my thoughts on the matter, I have written down some thoughts as well as given links. We have links to different things, courses. There's also roadmap.sh that gives you specific roadmaps to things. That's all linked in here. So why not start with that link for your DevOps career? And you can see multiple opinions and references to go find your roadmap. Conrad saying Datree would be a good addition in the configuration. So you're thinking, is Datree, Conrad, if you're still here, are you thinking that's on every Kubernetes cluster. Is that what you're saying? You would put that on every one of your Kubernetes clusters? We need a WAF firewall, anything there in K8's landscape, which makes it easy to bring in. Are there on-prem solutions? I don't actually know. A lot of some of the fancier ingresses would provide WAF functionality, but I typically use CloudFront. Not CloudFront. Cloudflare, and whatever the clouds provide. Right, when I'm working with a team, we don't normally put that in Kubernetes itself because we usually have cloud-based load balancers in front of that. Right, a lot of the teams I know use Cloudflare, and not everybody likes their WAF functionality. So I don't really have off the top of my head. The funny thing is I don't have enough people asking for it. WAF is one of those things where it's like everybody should probably have something, and I don't have a lot of clients that ask for it because they probably already have a solution. So I don't have to come up with something for them on Kubernetes. Martin's voting for cloud native build packs, but I am not a fan. To me, build packs were like, I need Woofy now. That's what I'm looking at. I think all of my images in the future are going to end up being built by ChainGuard's Woofy images. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I'm not a fan of build packs. I find that build packs are too bloated and too much stuff provided for me. But that's just, I haven't tried them in the last year. I don't know if there's new functionality, but that's what that's my experience. So over at ChainGuard, let's see if we can find their images. It's always fun trying to go through a website when you know you can search for it. So, woofy.dev is down, or did they misspell it? Yeah, their URL doesn't work. I have to tell them. All right, so they have what's called the ChainGuard images. So this is I had them on the show like a year ago, and I love the idea. And what they've been doing is they're putting a lot of energy into essentially making better default base images than Docker Hub provides. So they're better means that they're smaller and less or zero CVEs, zero vulnerabilities is their goal with every one of their images. And they even go to the level of fixing bugs in code they have nothing to do with so that image will stay zero CVEs. So they also use a custom base distribution that's a little bit based on Alpine Linux, but it goes a step further to ensure that you have the right C binary. Because if you're a fan of Alpine, you know that it uses a different C compiler, and that creates some of the problems. And that's why I don't recommend Alpine, just native Alpine. Like I don't use Node:\Alpine. I don't ever recommend it. I've had way too many problems with it over the years. And the Node team doesn't even support Alpine, or specifically the Musil build C compiler as a way to make a Node app. So why would you want to do that? So the Woofy images actually are based on glibc, the standard C compiler and libraries that we all are used to with things like Ubuntu and CentOS and Debian. So they do all this, and then for free, they have all these images. Let me see if I can find. Yeah, view the catalog. So what you do is you kind of go find the particular thing you care about. So let's just say like Node. I'm a Node programmer, Node.js. So I go find the Node one. And we can look at the overview real quick. So this is what you would use for your base image as you would swap this out for the base Docker node image. So instead of using node colon Alpine, you would use this URL, this image name. And then they show you some tags they have. The dev tag has a shell in it. The non-dev tag, the latest one, doesn't. And they give you examples of how to deal with all this and how to run it. And it does have, it's a little bit different, and it doesn't always have package managers for the OS package managers built in. So it may take you some time learning how Wolfie, the solution that builds these, how that makes these images and how you would maybe make your own custom ones. But in a lot of cases, if you're using something like Alpine, this can be a drop-in replacement. If you're someone who has a small Docker file, it may be very easy to switch over to the ChainGuard Wolfie images. But I think, to me, this is the future that I'm looking at. In fact, I'm going to be talking at DockerCon, and I will definitely be mentioning this. Specifically for programming languages where you have to ship the programming engine with your app, like anything that's compiled at runtime, right? So Node.js, PHP, Python, Ruby, .NET, right? These languages need to be shipped, the binary that you run with your app source code, versus something that can be compiled to a binary, like obviously a C program or a Go program or a Rust program. I know there's lots of other languages out there that can do it, but those languages are really easy to ship a very small container. But in these others, they often are very complicated, large images that end up with dozens, if not hundreds, of vulnerabilities in them. And the ChainGuard images solve that. They work really hard to keep that image 0 CVEs, which is an amazing feat compared to Docker Hub. All right, it's 2 hours in, so let's wrap this up. What questions have I missed? Is this Q&A available to watch later? Yes, it's on YouTube. You can watch it anytime on YouTube. You can go back in my channel and watch all 232 episodes, or however many we've had. Great question. How about mod security as a WAF? I don't know anything about mod security. Sorry. Yeah, Martin's saying Flamingo, expand Argo CD with Flux. Yeah, I have not tried out Flamingo yet because I'm not sure I want to run both. I'm not. I know that they made the tool. I have not been convinced that I need both. Like everything I need to do, I can do with Argo. Why do I also need Flux? I've read all of the blog posts about why, if you like Flux, but you want this stuff that Argo can do. It just seems like it's more complicated. It's like a problem looking for a solution looking for a problem. Is why, So it's like, I need to get someone on the show to explain to me why they went from just Argo CD to Flux with Argo CD. Because what can it do that Argo can't do out of the box? I don't know the answer to that question. Is there something like, that's an interesting question. Argo is a dashboard. Sounds nice. Is there something like that, but for GitOps with Docker only? Not that I'm aware of. For a little bit, there was a project for Swarm, but it has gone quiet. And so I don't think it's had a commit in like 3 or 4 years. For Docker only, I don't know of a GitOps solution. One of the things that these GitOps solutions do is they work with the Kubernetes API, which already has reconciliation built in, right? So Docker doesn't have that. Docker doesn't have a reconciliation engine. Swarm does a little bit, but Swarm lacks the APIs to, I think, really work well with something like GitOps. Now, Portainer, I know, does some stuff. So you could, I think the thing that maybe would be the closest is just trying out Portainer. It's maybe not everything that you would need in a full GitOps solution, but I know plenty of people that use Portainer to manage stuff running on Docker or Swarm through infrastructure as code or through the GUI, so they don't have to, run Docker batch scripts or anything. So try out Portainer. I would use that the tree could be used as part of CD on staging and production clusters. My understanding with the tree was always that it was a format checker, right, Conrad? Like it's like a linter, a fancy linter, and checker. There's Kubescope is another one that does for Kubernetes clusters some security stuff, like security auditing. So yeah, you're right. There's probably a couple of tools like that are additional tools, particularly when you want to monitor your Kubernetes cluster for misconfiguration and stuff like that. So yeah, the tree. We've had the tree on the show, everyone. So DATREE. That's what Conrad's talking about. They were on the show, I think, was it last year or at the beginning of this year? I forget when. So you can look back on this YouTube channel to find that. Oh, yeah, Martin's saying he doesn't particularly like build packs, but it's promoted by the Spring community. Got it. Oh, so maybe you were mentioning build packs as if you're going to be a Java developer, use, you might want to learn build packs if you're a Java developer, because that'll help you know containers and know all the container tooling. That's a great idea, Martin. Thank you. Yes, I get it now. Yeah, and I know at least know what Spring is. I think I've played around with some Spring sample apps, so I at least know enough to pretend like I know things. But yeah, Spring likes to use build packs. Cool. And .NET, that's right. .NET can be compiled to a native binary nowadays, and that's what I would be doing with .NET, right? Like ideally, I'm shipping binaries and artifacts, not entire programming language executables. If you go look at the Node image, just go download Node, even the Slim. Go download the Node Slim image and then do a file count in the container. It's hundreds of thousands of files. Hundreds of thousands. And that's all libraries and dependencies in order to make Node run. Or you could write it in .NET, Go, or Rust and have one file. Now, if it's a front-end website, you're still going to ship artifacts like CSS and JavaScript and stuff like that. But your program itself. You tend to use Scratch. There ain't nothing more secure than a Scratch image, Martin. I'm with you. I should get the K6 people on the show. All right. All right. I'll put it on the list. I also need to do a Loki show. Speaking of Grafana stuff. K6. Yeah, I will put that on the list and then figure out how I can find someone. Maybe I'll find someone at KubeCon from the K6 team. So thanks for that suggestion. I appreciate it. All right, people. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I am going to sign off. And next week, stay around for next week. So let me give you the rundown of who's going to be on the show soon. So next week on the show, we got my friend Ken Collins, an AWS serverless hero, is going to be here. We don't talk about serverless a lot on this show lately, so Ken's going to fix that. We're going to be talking about containers in Lambda. So come back next week, same time, and we're going to be doing live stuff, discussions, and maybe demos around AWS stuff. And then the week after that is another one of these Q&As. So we're going to have a monthly cloud native Q&A. I'm going to bring my friend Nirmal on, and we're going to answer all these same questions in 2 weeks. The week after that, we're going to have Multipass on the show. So Multipass is coming late September, and we're going to have a discussion around the latest features in Multipass for setting up VMs on your local machine. It's one of my favorite ways. Well, it is my favorite way to make local Ubuntu VMs in seconds. And we're going to talk about it. and talk about their new Docker features for making it seamless for running your Docker commands into a machine inside of a VM, rather than even using Docker Desktop or Rancher Desktop or Podman Desktop. You can just use multipass with a Docker command line. So anyway, we're going to talk all about that, and of course, more Q&As coming and more guests. So stay tuned. See you soon.